Which celebrities have famously gotten away with serious crimes? Karl Malone, a Hall of Fame basketball player who got away with impregnating a 12-year-old girl at age 20. The reason he wasn't charged was because the family of the girl knew he was going to be rich in the NBA, so they avoided charges for child support. The son of the 13-year-old, Demetris Bell, went on to play in the NFL for a few years too. Rick James. In 1991, him and his girlfriend kidnapped and tortured a girl, to include but not limited to sexual abuse, forcing her to smoke crack cocaine, burning her with a hot crack pipe. I sure do love me some funk. But he was a certified piece of shit. I'm no longer Rick James, bitch. Don King, likely one of, if not the most famous boxing promoters of all time, set up the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thriller in Manila. Served less than 4 years for stomping a man to death because he owed him 600. Pardoned. I came here to mention this. He stomped a man to death, and nearly every fighter he managed has got bad stories to say about him and how he stole their money. This thread is a real eye-opener. So people like Britney Spears and Amanda Bynes have their names run through the mud after having breakdowns. But some other celebrities have committed actual horrible crimes and nothing happens to them. This is awful. People like Britney Spears and Amanda Bynes have their names run through the mud after having breakdowns. But some other celebrities have committed actual horrible crimes and nothing happens to them. That's a great point, and sadly these victim celebrities don't usually get to share their full side of the story. Typically because of lack of airtime or non-disclosure agreements with their management label studio. Vince Neil killed someone drunk driving. There's a huge list of famous and or rich people who have killed someone drunk driving and not even gotten a slap on the wrist for it. Victor Salva, director of Jeepers Creepers. The man is a convicted pedophile who filmed himself molesting a 12-year-old boy and only served 15 months. Still making movies now. Francis Ford Coppola supported and assisted Salva in getting several charges reduced and dropped. He also threatened the boy victim with being blacklisted out of Hollywood. In 1975, Aerosmith vocalist Steven Tyler convinced the parents of 14-year-old groupie Julia Holcomb to sign over guardianship to him so that she could live with him in Boston. Tyler, who was 27 at the time, dated and did drugs with Julia for 3 years before they eventually broke up after unplanned pregnancy which resulted in an abortion. Tyler then returned Julia to her parents at the age of 17. That's just barely scratching the tip of the iceberg. It gets more messed up the more you dig into it, but nevertheless Tyler would continue his successful music career and even be inducted to the Hall of Fame in 2001. That is so dark and disturbing. Has Julia ever spoke up about what she has been through? In the UK, our main satellite provider, Sky, has produced a documentary on all of this. I know because I've been bombarded with adverts for weeks. Here's an article on it. Link. I know R. Kelly is in trouble now, but long did he go free after that whole pissing on a kid thing. A decade. The episode of Chappelle's show where he did the I Wanna Piss on You skit aired in 2003. So damn near 20 years it was a known thing. Same goes for people like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. People knew, but they had enough money and influence to stop any major repercussions for decades. Elvis Presley always had a thing for young girls and would invite them over for sleepovers. He was obsessed with virginal girls and called them cherries. Of course, he met his wife, Priscilla, when she was only 14. Yet people just shrugged this off and thought it was fine. Half the Rolling Stones had 14-year-old girlfriends on the road with them. Seeing Kirk Douglas being mentioned reminded me of how Clark Gable date raped Loretta Young, resulting in a daughter she had to have in secret and pass off as adopted. She only let him meet the child once. When Young was elderly, she heard the term date rape and inquired its meaning. When told, she allegedly said, "That's what happened to me with Clark." Just awful on so many levels. The sheer amount of times this happened and is still happening to young women in the industry is sickening. My mom told me a story about her which ended in attempted date rape. It was the 70s. She said they didn't even have the word date rape yet. I asked her what they called it back then. She said a bad date. That stuck with me. The prevalence of molestation and sexual abuse pre-90s is really hard to overstate. I understand that sexual assaults and child sexual abuse still occurs, but there's something strange about how many boomers and older using that term more descriptively than jokingly as my SN just treat that kind of thing as background noise. My grandmother related a story to me when she was in her 90s about working as a coat and hat check girl at a department store in New York City in the 1930s. Telling me that she preferred that one because unlike some other places her and orphan sister and brother would work, this one had a table between me and the men, which kept them from getting as antsy. My grandmother had 5 kids. 4 girls and a boy, and all 4 girls were molested by a friend of the family and survived multiple sexual assaults through the 70s. Heck, I was born in the early 80s, conceived in what my mom never defined as date rape, but almost certainly was. I do sometimes wonder how many DUIs get swept away here in Southern California. I'd assume all the smaller stuff like celebrity DUIs are non-issues. Remember even Sweetheart Ray's with a spoon drunkenly asking the cop who pulled her over if he knew who she was. Seems like pretty much every rock and roll star from the 70s 80s raped children. I mean it still happens. The bassist from Walk the Moon took young girls to his hotel room after shows on tours. Pretty sure Davey Vanity, some huge emo Tumblr star from the Zeros, groomed multiple young girls. One of them was 11 Jessie Slaughter. James Brown. Look him up and what legal trouble he got into over the years. Didn't seem like a very nice guy, and he got arrested and charged a lot. Lots of assault, and in one case he kept a woman trapped so he could use her for sexual gratification. Might not all be true but sure were a lot of charges over the years. He beat singer Tammy Terrell. From the wiki, in 1962, 17-year-old Terrell became involved in an abusive relationship with James Brown, who was 12 years her senior. One night on the road in 1963, Terrell left Brown after he assaulted her for not watching his entire performance. Bobby Bennett, former member of the Famous Flames, witnessed the incident. He beat Tammy Terrell terrible. She was bleeding, shedding blood. Tammy left him because she didn't want her butt whipped, said Bennett. Pretty sure Charlie Sheen has a lot to answer for yet has somehow never served any serious jail time. Aside from other numerous domestic abuse accusations in his past, he actually shot Kelly Preston in the arm during their relationship. I don't think anything came from that. Preston was probably just glad to get away alive. Didn't he also knowingly give people STDs? Roman Polanski. He's had a heck of a life, but never faced up to this one. Creep. According to Tom O'Neill and his book about Charles Manson, Polanski forced Sharon Tate to have sex with 2 men and recorded it on video. The video was seen by the police and brought back to his house so the public wouldn't find out. Apparently just one of many incidents. Honestly, when I first heard about Polanski and saw a picture of him, I drew a completely different picture of him. Finding out about all of this was somehow mind-boggling. Edit. The book is called Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 60s. Marcus Alonso, a Spanish footballer who plays for Chelsea. He killed a 19-year-old girl while driving drunk and got away with little real punishment. Patrick Kluivert also killed someone while driving. Not drunk, but he drove 104 km/h where 50 was allowed. Salman Khan. So many famous crimes: killing a black buck, hit and run with his car, etc. They even made a game on one of his crimes, and he got that game banned from Play Store. Note, not the guy from Khan Academy. On the 28th of September 2002, Khan was arrested for rash and negligent driving after his car ran into a bakery in Mumbai. One person who was sleeping on the pavement outside the bakery died, and 3 others were injured in the accident. On the 6th of May 2015, Khan was found guilty of all charges in the case. The Bombay Sessions Court concluded that Khan was driving the car under the influence of alcohol, causing the death of 1 and serious injury to 4 homeless persons. Sessions Judge D.W. Deshpande convicted the actor for culpable homicide not amounting to murder and sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Later in the same day, Khan, being represented by senior counsel Amit Desai, was granted bail by the Bombay High Court till the 8th of May 2015. The kidnapping and eventual death of prime witness police constable Ravindra Patel remains a mystery, with some suspecting the involvement of organized crime. In December 2015, Khan was acquitted of all charges from this case due to lack of evidence. That's pretty ducked up. I'm really surprised to not have seen anyone mention Phil Spector. Yeah, he was convicted for 2 murders in the early 2000s, but it was straight up out in the open that he was an abusive, violent, and unhinged menace for the whole 40 years before that. He put the Ramones through the ducking ringer and pointed a gun at Dee over him not wanting to get back in the recording booth after spending 12 straight hours overnight in there. After that incident, Dee went on to say something along the lines of "it's only a matter of time until he kills someone, and so he would." Editing at a ringer, and he actually only had 1 murder conviction, but 2 trials. Ringer, hardly no emergency room. R. Kelly and his sex tape with a 14-year-old. I watched all 10H of Surviving R. Kelly, and yes, he's probably gonna rot in jail, but the fact that he managed to get away with it for 30 years is truly shocking. Charlemagne the God openly admitted to drugging a woman without her knowledge before having sex with her, or air. He specifically used the term Spanish fly before talking about how, when she woke up, she had no clue what had happened or with who. I do not, for the life of me, understand how that creep is still famous and seemingly rising to higher levels. Jimmy Savile. The documentary Louis Theroux did after it all came out is so disturbing. There's one interview in particular he does with a victim that made me feel physically sick. I get so angry thinking about it all. For those unfamiliar, I'll expand on the above. A famous British radio and TV personality known for Top of the Pops, which had a primarily teenage audience, and Jim Fix-It, a primarily child-teen audience. He was unbelievably famous and an incredibly powerful person. He had friends in high places, was extremely well connected, and was loved by the public. He had a knighthood. There were people who said he seemed creepy and shady, but that was the minority opinion, or at the very least the opinion that was not voiced. There's people who got blacklisted from the BBC for attempting to voice that and out his actions, but this guy was seriously A-list in the UK, and to a degree intouchable. He was commended for his charity work, a TV show where kids wrote to him to get them things or help them meet their heroes, and he donated his money to hospital wards and children's wards. He used these wards to abuse children. Nurses would tell the kids to pretend to be asleep so he wouldn't touch them. He had keys to rooms of the hospital and volunteered as a porter in some. He allegedly would visit the morgue and the bodies inside of it. He also abused children outside of that setting, with allegations of abuse happening at the BBC along with general allegations of the assault of adults as well. Victims were silenced and disbelieved because he was a national hero and beloved despite it being a somewhat known secret in some circles. The BBC helped hide it along with his other rich connected associates. Meanwhile, hospitals had pressure to keep it quiet because of his fundraising. Some of the staff knew and some suspected, but he was too powerful a figure and his donations made them indebted to him. When he died, he was practically given a state funeral, and then very soon after his death the news broke. It had been a story in the work for a long time and finally it was published. Number of victims estimated to be in the early hundreds at least, with the Met reporting 450 victims, aged between 7 and 75 officially. They had investigated him in 2009, 2 years before his death, but that investigation was dropped, and an earlier report in 1958 allegedly happening and also being dropped as well. And he wasn't even ashamed of it or trying hard to hide it. He would joke to the press when they phoned him, "She told me she was over 16. And when in April 2000, Savile was the subject of a Louis Theroux doc and was asked if he was a pedophile, he said, "We live in a very funny world, and it's easier for me, as a single man, to say I don't like children, because that puts a lot of salacious tabloid people off the hunt. How do they know whether I'm a pedophile or not? How does anybody know whether I am? Nobody knows whether I'm or not. I know I'm not." A horrific man with a horrific trail of abuse behind him who died without ever having to face any sort of justice or consequence. He died happy after decades of abusing innocents, free from consequence. Worth remembering. This is the short version. In reality there's a lot more, and it's not a fun chain of events, and this is heavily summarized and brushing over a lot. Nobuyusuke Kishi, Prime Minister of Japan in the late 50s. Ducker was called the Devil of Manchuria during the Japanese occupation of China, and was responsible for most of Unit 731 experiments. If you don't know what it is, it makes some things about the Holocaust look tame. In the final days of the war, seeing the tides shifting violently against Japan, he decided to cooperate with the Americans so as to not be executed for crimes against humanity. Pretty disgusting human being, and he never got punished for what he did. In the final days of the war, seeing the tides shifting violently against Japan, he decided to cooperate with the Americans so as to not be executed for crimes against humanity. Sounds like some Hans Lander shit right there. Steve Tyler convincing the parents of a 14-year-old to sign over guardianship to him, and then getting her pregnant is something that isn't scrutinized or condemned enough. I mean, if R. Kelly is a sexual predator, why does this guy seem to come out unscathed? By the way, in no way justifying what R. Kelly is alleged to have done. I mean, if R. Kelly is a sexual predator, why does this guy seem to come out unscathed? It's not just him. I'd say it's probably a majority of famous musicians, especially from back in the day. The more you look into stories of rock bands and pop acts, the harder it is to not think almost all of them were doing this. Maybe they weren't going as far as like guardianship, but they definition didn't ask the age of the girls they were letting backstage. Roman Polanski, the guy fled to Europe to avoid jail in the US for drugging and raping a minor. He's living very comfortably over there and is even being given awards and celebrated in France. I feel bad for him due to his childhood and then of course losing his wife and unborn son in such a horrific way, but that doesn't excuse what he did. From Wikipedia. In October 2017, a woman named Renate Langer interviewed by Swiss police said Polanski raped her in Gstaad when she was 15. In 1972, that same month, Miriam Barnard accused Polanski of having assaulted her in 1975 when she was 10 years old. In November 2019, a French actress named Valentine Monnier said Polanski violently raped her at a ski chalet in Gstaad in 1975. These are in addition to the 13-year-old he drugged and raped. Classy guy. Jimmy Savile. He had that we can't touch him because he raises millions for charity thing going on. John Lydon Johnny Rotten called it out in 1978 and was then effectively banned from the BBC for life. Here is the recording. Link. It starts about 50 seconds in. And while he's being deliberately provocative, there is a truth where he says we are not allowed to talk about it. Savile got away with it. Edit. Courtney Love also called out Harvey Weinstein in 2005. Here it is. Link.